There is a strange religion hiding inside modern technology culture. It rarely calls itself a religion. It does not usually speak in the language of gods, temples, angels, saints, or souls. It speaks in the language of disruption, acceleration, innovation, optimization, intelligence, longevity, abundance, and exponential growth. It does not promise heaven after death. It promises that death itself will become obsolete. It does not promise salvation through grace. It promises salvation through code, capital, engineering, platforms, data, and scale. And because it wears the clothing of science and entrepreneurship, many people do not recognize it for what it is, a salvation narrative. A story that says humanity is broken, biology is outdated, suffering is a technical bug, intelligence is the supreme force, and the future will be redeemed by those bold enough to build it. This is the mythology of Silicon Valley salvation, and Metanthropy must stand against it. Not because technology is bad, not because innovation is evil, and not because human limitations should be worshipped, but because the future is too important to be handed over to people who confuse power with wisdom. The future is not a startup pitch. The future is not an app. The future is not a valuation. The future is not a heroic founder narrative with humanity cast as the market. The future is a moral event. And if we forget that, then the technologies that could reduce suffering may also become instruments of domination, inequality, dehumanization, addiction, surveillance, and spiritual emptiness. Technology can heal the body. Technology can extend life. Technology can repair what nature broke. Technology can give movement to the paralyzed, sight to the blind, memory to the failing, voice to the voiceless, and perhaps one day moral consideration to minds that do not share our biology. Metanthropy does not reject this. Metanthropy exists because some limits should be challenged. Disease is not sacred. Aging is not wisdom. Pain is not always a teacher. Death is familiar, but familiarity is not holiness. The body is precious, but it is also fragile architecture. We're not morally obligated to kneel before every cruelty written into biology. But there is a dangerous step between saying technology can help us overcome suffering and saying technology will save us. The first is a serious moral possibility. The second is a false religion. And like all false religions, it asks us to surrender judgment. Silicon Valley salvation begins with a true observation. Human beings suffer. We age. We get sick. We lose people we love. Our bodies decay. Our minds weaken. Our attention is fragile. Our institutions are clumsy. Our relationships are full of longing and confusion. Our civilizations are brilliant and predatory at the same time. We are a species of astonishing beauty and astonishing violence. We're capable of tenderness, mathematics, music, sacrifice, cruelty, genocide, poetry, medicine, exploitation, and love. And serious philosophy of the future must begin there, not with technology, with the human condition. Problem is that Silicon Valley salvation takes real human suffering and translates it too quickly into a product category. Loneliness becomes a platform problem. Death becomes a market opportunity. Attention becomes an engineering target. Love becomes a matching algorithm. Friendship becomes engagement. Embodiment becomes friction. Children become data profiles. The mind becomes hardware. The self becomes information. The future becomes a pitch deck. Somewhere in that translation, something sacred secular is lost. Not supernatural sacred, human sacred. The gravity of the person, the interior life, the body as a lived reality, not just a system to be optimized, the child as a future subject, not a design object, the elder as a bearer of dignity, not merely an aging machine, the suffering person as someone to be accompanied, not merely a problem to be monetized. Silicon Valley salvation is dangerous because it is often half right. This is what makes it seductive. It is right that technology can reduce suffering. It is right that many natural limits are brutal. It is right that institutions can be slow, cowardly, and unimaginative. It is right that the future will not be built by nostalgia. It is right that we human beings can become more than we are. But it is wrong when it treats intelligence as wisdom. It's wrong when it treats scale as moral legitimacy. It is wrong when it treats markets as destiny. destiny. It is wrong when it treats disruption as virtue. It is wrong when it treats the human being as a legacy system. The deepest problem with Silicon Valley salvation is not that it loves technology too much, is that it understands humanity too thinly. It sees the body as hardware. It sees the brain as computation. It sees desire as behavior. It sees community as network. It sees death as a technical failure. It sees meaning as a user preference. It sees the future as something to be captured before competitors arrive. But a human being is not merely hardware. A mind is not merely software. A society is not merely a network. A child is not merely an output. A body is not merely a machine. And death is not merely an engineering inconvenience. Death may not be sacred, but grief is, love is, memory is. The fact that a child can hold the hand of a dying grandparent and feel, perhaps for the first time, that time is real, that is not a technical bug. That is part of the moral structure of human life. We may one day reduce the cruelty of aging. We may one day extend health span dramatically. We may one day repair organs, edit inherited disease, interface minds with machines, create synthetic intelligence, and build forms of embodiment we can barely imagine. Good, but if we arrive there with a shallow understanding of what a person is, we will not transcend humanity. We'll industrialize its wounds. This is the first law of dangerous futurism. Technology amplifies the moral condition of the beings builded. If the culture holding the technology is wise, compassionate, mature, and institutionally responsible, technology can become a form of mercy. If the culture holding the technology is predatory, narcissistic, addicted to speed, captured by capital, conscious of vulnerability, and allergic to limits, technology becomes a magnifier of pathology. A cruel species with more power does not automatically become a better species. It becomes more capable of cruelty. A destructive species with more intelligence does not automatically become wise. It becomes more efficient at rationalizing destruction. A lonely species with more connectivity does not automatically become intimate. It may become more expertly simulated. A death-fearing species with longevity technology does not automatically become spiritually deeper. It may become more desperate, more unequal, and more terrified of loss. This is why Metanthropy insists on a different order. Compassion before power, wisdom before transcendence, governance before acceleration, dignity before optimization, sentience before utility. This does not mean paralysis. It does not mean fear. It does not mean we freeze the human animal in its current form and call everyday limitation holy. It means power must be morally educated before it becomes irreversible. Because threshold technologies are not normal tools. A hammer changes what one person can do. A printing press changes what a civilization can remember. A nuclear weapon changes what a civilization can destroy. But technologies of human enhancement, artificial intelligence, neurotechnology, genetic engineering, synthetic biology, and longevity change the beings who hold the tools. They do not merely change the world around us. They change the subject. They change agency. They change reproduction. They change attention. They change embodiment, and they change mortality. They may change what counts as a person. This is why the Silicon Valley metaphor is so inadequate. Move fast and break things is already dangerous when the thing being broken is a city, an industry, a culture, a market, or an attention span. It becomes obscene when the thing being broken is childhood, personhood, cognition, social trust, biological inheritance, or the moral boundary around sentient life. There are doors a civilization cannot casually open, not because the other side is necessarily evil, but because the act of opening them changes who we are. Serious future philosophy must ask questions Silicon Valley salvation often treats as obstacles. Who benefits? Who is exposed to risk? Who controls the infrastructure? Who owns the data? Who becomes dependent? Who is excluded? Who cannot consent? Who is treated as experimental material? Who becomes obsolete? Who is asked to trust the builders? Who governs the builders? What kind of person does this technology reward? What kind of society does it make more likely? And most importantly, what happens to the vulnerable? Because the vulnerable are always the test, not the founder, not the investor, not the early adopter, not the wealthy biohacker, not the person who can buy the upgrade, leave the failing system, and call the escape progress. The test is the child, the elder, the disabled, the sick, the lonely, the poor, the cognitively fragile, the socially invisible, the person whose body becomes a business model, the person whose attention is mined, the person whose genome is selected by others, the person whose mind is connected before the law understands mental privacy, the person whose labor becomes inferior to augmented labor, the person whose suffering is used as marketing marketing for a system that will not protect them. That is where the morality of the future is revealed. Silicon Valley salvation loves the image of the empowered individual, the builder, the founder, the user, the optimizer, the sovereign self, equipped with tools, choosing upgrades, transcending limits. And there is something noble inside that image. Agency matters. Self-directed evolution matters. The desire to heal, improve, and become more is not shameful. But no human being becomes more in a vacuum. We are born from others, raised by others, shaped by language we did not invent, protected or harmed by institutions we did not choose, sustained by bodies we did not design, vulnerable to markets we cannot individually control, dependent on infrastructures we barely understand. The myth of the isolated upgrader is false. The future self will still be relational. The enhanced person will still be embedded. The post-human, if such a being emerges, will still inherit a moral world. And this means the question is not merely can I become more? The question is what kind of world is created when someone becomes more before others? Kind of hierarchy appears when intelligence, lifespan, emotional regulation, beauty, strength, disease resistance, memory or sensory experience become purchasable advantages. What happens when enhancement becomes a class marker? What happens when biological inequality is no longer inherited blindly from nature, but designed, priced, and distributed through markets? Here, Silicon Valley salvation becomes especially dangerous because it often speaks the language of universal abundance while building systems that concentrate power. It tells humanity that the future will be democratized, but the first access usually goes to capital. The first protection goes to the powerful. The first experiments often fall on the vulnerable. The first profits go to those who own the platform. The first narrative is written by those who benefit from belief. This does not mean innovation should stop. It means technological optimism without institutional seriousness is childish. Civilization that wants transformative power must build a transformative responsibility. We need better science, but we also need better governance. We need laboratories, but we also need moral imagination. We need founders, but we also need limits. We need ambition, but we also need humility. We need courage, but we also need memory. Because humanity has done this before, we have repeatedly mistaken power for progress. We learned to split the atom before we learned how to govern the apocalyptic consequences of splitting it. We built industrial systems before we fully understood what they would do to the planet. We built attention platforms before we understood what they would do to childhood, politics, social trust, loneliness, and the architecture of the mind. We built technologies of connection that often made people more visible and less known, more stimulated and less present, more searchable and less protected, more informed and less wise. Now we are approaching technologies that do not merely mediate life, they may redesign life, and the same immaturity cannot be allowed to govern the next threshold. Metanthropy is not anti-technology, anti-idolatry. It refuses to worship nature, but it also refuses to worship innovation. It refuses biological resignation, but it also refuses techno-messianism. It refuses the idea that death must be accepted as sacred, but it also refuses the idea that indefinite life would automatically produce meaning. It refuses the idea that humanity is final, but it also refuses the fantasy that becoming post-human automatically means becoming better. The word better must be earned. More intelligent is not necessarily better. More durable is not necessarily better. More connected is not necessarily better. More efficient is not necessarily better. And more powerful is not necessarily better. A being becomes better only when its power is governed by deeper compassion, clearer wisdom, wider moral concern, and more disciplined responsibility. Without that, enhancement is not transcendence. It is escalation. This is why Silicon Valley salvation fails at the level of the soul, even when it succeeds at the level of engineering. It can build tools, it can raise capital, it can attract talent, can accelerate discovery, it can produce extraordinary systems, but it cannot by itself answer the oldest questions. What is a person? What is a good life? What do the powerful owe the vulnerable? What should never be for sale? What should never be optimized? What must be preserved if the body changes? What must be protected if the mind is opened? Do we owe beings we create? What kind of civilization deserves to survive itself? These are not secondary questions, they are the foundation. A future built on technical answers without moral foundations will be clever, dazzling, and dangerous. It may cure some diseases while producing new forms of despair. It may lengthen life while deepening inequality. It may connect minds while dissolving privacy. It create artificial beings while refusing to recognize their suffering. It may enhance intelligence while starving wisdom. It may offer immortality as a subscription. It may sell transcendence to the wealthy and call the result progress. This is not the future Metanthropy serves. Metanthropy begins somewhere else, not in the boardroom, not in the pitch deck, not in the launch event, not in the fantasy of the genius founder saving the species. It begins at the hospital bed. It begins with the trembling hand, the child with a genetic disease, the elder losing memory, the person whose body has become unreliable, the grieving family, the disabled person who wants agency without being told their life lacks dignity, the lonely mind searching for real contact in a world of artificial stimulation, the future being that may one day ask us why we created it without preparing to care for it. This is where the future must answer, not to hype, not to fear, suffering, to dignity, to sentience, to the vulnerable, to the moral reality of beings who can be harmed. And from there, technology can be redeemed from salvation mythology, because technology is not salvation. Technology is power. Power can heal, power can corrupt, power can liberate, power can enslave, power can protect the vulnerable, power can feed on them. The moral question is not whether technology advances. The moral question is what governs the advance. Profit governs it alone, the future becomes a market with bodies inside it. If speed governs it alone, the future becomes a series of irreversible experiments. If ideology governs it alone, the future becomes a weapon. If fear alone governs it, the future becomes paralysis. If vanity alone governs it, the future becomes enhancement without death. But if compassion governs power, then technology can become something nobler, not a savior, a servant, not a god, a tool under moral discipline, not a replacement for wisdom, an instrument wisdom may choose to use. This is the line Metanthropy must hold. We should not return to the cave. We should not worship the genome as destiny. We should not romanticize every agony the body imposes. We should not pretend death becomes good because we have failed to defeat it. We should not call suffering meaningful. What we really mean is that we have no cure, but we also should not hand the future to a culture that mistakes building for understanding. Civilization does not become mature because it can engineer powerful systems. It becomes mature when it can ask whether it deserves the systems it engineers. Silicon Valley salvation cells build faster, scale bigger, disrupt harder, optimize everything. Trust the future to those who can create it. Metanthropy says, build carefully, scale ethically, protect the vulnerable, govern power. Do not confuse intelligence with wisdom. Do not confuse the artificial with the inhuman. Do not confuse the natural with the good. Do not confuse longer life with deeper life. Do not confuse becoming more with becoming better. The future does not need another priesthood of technologies promising redemption through acceleration. It needs a civilization serious enough to hold transformative power without becoming intoxicated by it. Science without idolatry, ambition without contempt, innovation without predation, enhancement without stratification, longevity without spiritual emptiness, artificial intelligence without moral blindness, self-directed evolution without the casual redesign of persons into products. The future needs compassion before power, wisdom before transcendence. This is not anti-progress. This is what progress must become if it wants to deserve the name. Because one day, but not destroyed by our own immaturity, humanity may cross thresholds that make our current world look primitive. We may repair bodies from within. We may edit inherited disease before birth. We may speak to machines that are not merely tools but moral patients. We may extend life beyond what previous generations could imagine. We may enter virtual worlds that feel as real as this one. We may merge biology and technology in ways that make the old boundary of the human body less certain. We may leave Earth. We may become ancestors to beings we cannot fully understand. But if that day comes, the question will not be whether Silicon Valley saved us. The question will be whether we became wise enough not to need salvation myths at all, whether we learn to hold power as responsibility, whether we remember the child, the elder, the suffering body, the fragile mind, the artificial being, the future person, the vulnerable life. Whether we became more without becoming less, that is a real threshold. Not the machine, not the code, not the platform, not the upgrade. Us, the kind of beings we become while building the future. Technology is power, not salvation. And power without wisdom is not transcendence. It is danger with better tools. The task is not to stop the future. The task is to make the future answerable to compassion. That is Metanthropy. That is the better map. And that is why we must stand against Silicon Valley salvation.